We live in an age where the luxury of our surroundings has reached an unprecedented peak. Yet if we sit quietly and look around the environments we have built, we find ourselves surrounded by a strange, climate-controlled vacuum. We inhabit glass towers and sleek corporate high-rise corner offices, where the chaotic, unedited world of nature is completely filtered out, replaced by the soft, pressurized hush of central ventilation. The air we breathe is perfectly tempered, carrying no scent of damp earth or seasonal shifts, but rather the subtle, expensive aroma of premium Italian leather upholstery and polished mahogany desks. If we observe the sensory landscape of this space right now, we are bathed in the harsh, uniform white glare cast by multiple high-definition desktop monitors, illuminating our faces with an artificial glow that never fades, regardless of whether it is noon or midnight. On our wrists, the cold, smooth weight of a luxury mechanical watch tracks the passing hours with microscopic precision, its subtle ticking a constant metronome reminding us of an invisible schedule. We hold expensive fountain pens over thick linen-weave paper, yet our fingers rarely create anything that springs from our raw human vitality. Instead, we draft legal strategies, financial forecasts, and optimization metrics, completely encased in a bubble of synthetic prestige. This beautifully arranged landscape of high-status luxury presents us with a profound and agonizing modern paradox that we carry with us through every hour of the working day. We have acquired exactly what the modern culture told us to want, climbing the steep institutional ladders to secure our high-earning positions. Yet as we stand looking out of our double-paned glass windows at the glittering city skyline below, we are haunted by an ambient, hollow dread. We feel an underlying, systemic anxiety that whispers we have unknowingly bartered our actual, unrepeatable life force for the preservation of an elegant, optimized cage. Every asset we own seems to have developed an invisible set of teeth, demanding our constant performance, our continuous hypervigilance, and our absolute organizational alignment just to maintain its presence. We have become hyper-efficient wanderers who live almost entirely above the neck, manipulating concepts and managing impressions, while our natural, instinctive human self sits starving in the dark. We are deeply connected to global markets, instant digital feeds, and elite networks, yet we feel a profound existential estrangement from the earth beneath our feet, the deep wisdom of our bones, and the immediate, unembellished reality of the present moment. We all know the specific, quiet grief that catches us when the frantic momentum of our productivity momentarily drops, leaving us exposed to the contents of our own unvarnished awareness. We have all experienced that solitary pause when we step into a high-end luxury restroom or look out across a late-evening corporate lounge, catching our own reflection in the spotless mirrors. In that brief suspension of input, when the digital screens are dark and the notifications stop their relentless blinking, a cold, heavy question rises from the depths of our chest to meet us. We ask ourselves what happened to the simple, wild, and unburdened vitality we used to possess before we wrapped our identities in executive titles and financial commitments. We look at the expensive fabric of our clothing and the prestige of our credentials, and we realize that we are carrying an immense, exhausting accumulation of psychological baggage that wears down our spirits and calcifies our capacity for spontaneous joy. We are trapped in a split consciousness, constantly haunted by a style-eyed, idealized ghost of who we think we ought to be, while our real, fragile, and non-linear human self is treated as an inefficient liability that must be permanently hidden behind a wall of calculated professionalism. Let us trace this internal division away from our corporate titles and map it directly onto the living laboratory of our own physical bodies. For the body is a non-negotiable archive that records the exact price we pay for our illusions. As we sit together in this space, let us drop the spotlight of our attention out of our analytical minds and sweep it through the physical topography of our flesh and bone. Notice the precise somatic blueprint of our high-status entrapment. There is a rigid, stone-like restriction anchoring itself directly into our diaphragm and solar plexus, creating a tight muscular brace against the world, as if we are permanently preparing our upper abdomen to receive a physical blow. Because this central junction is frozen, our breath cannot drop into the soft, expansive depths of the belly instead. It hitches high in the thoracic cavity, forcing us to draw shallow, rapid, and clavicular drafts of air that signal our nervous system to remain in a perpetual state of low-grade evolutionary survival. Our jaws are micro-clenched, the dense masseter muscles locked in a vise-like grip that represents the physical containment of our true creative voice, our authentic opinions, and our unmonetized human impulses, all held back to maintain institutional harmony and protect our perceived position within the corporate tribe. If we look lower into our frame, we can feel a deep, deadening immobility occupying the lower back, the pelvic bowl, and the gluteal muscles, the exact structural seat of our primal stability and physical security. Prolonged hours spent sitting in high-backed leather executive chairs, combined with an underlying unconscious terror of financial downward mobility, have caused these foundational muscles to shorten and calcify, cutting off the warm instinctual currents of energy that connect our bodies to the earth. Our shoulders are pulled upward and forward, creating a protective hollow around our heart. A biological reflex of defense designed to protect an emotional core that feels completely exposed to the transactional scrutiny of the marketplace. Our eyelids flutter with a subtle micro-tremor, and the optic nerves behind our eyes feel hot and strained from tracking the highly saturated pixels of performance metrics and financial spreadsheets. We have mutated our physical frame into a hyper-vigilant organic machine, spent and depleted by the sheer physical effort of maintaining a flawless facade, walking through our lives completely disembodied, treating our physical vessels as nothing more than an inconvenient scaffolding to carry our thinking brains from one boardroom meeting to another. This profound physical and psychological tightening is the direct consequence of a modern illusion that has wrapped itself around our consciousness like fine, ornate gold wire. We find ourselves standing before the vast, open horizon of our short human lives, yet our wings have been systematically bound by a golden filament of hig-earning lifestyle inflation and corporate expectation. We have been conditioned by our culture to believe that security can be permanently purchased if we can just accumulate enough material prestige, secure the next elite promotion, and insulate ourselves inside an increasingly luxurious sanctuary of assets. But we fail to see that this process of accumulation has mutated into a subtle form of imprisonment. We mistake the intricate, beautiful filigree lines of our expensive birdcage for an open sky, pouring our finest creative energy, our sleep, and our relationship capital into the preservation of a structure that fundamentally suffocates our autonomy. We live in a permanent state of identity fusion, believing that if we ever dare to slow down, if we make an unpolished choice, or if we allow our financial velocity to drop, the entire fabricated monument of who we are will collapse into catastrophic irrelevance, exposing us to the ultimate terror of being ordinary, unclassified, and unseen. Let us pause for a moment to truly behold the sheer, system-wide exhaustion of this way of being, allowing ourselves to feel the raw weight of the armor we have worked so hard to build. We are running an endless marathon on a high-status treadmill, burning an incredible volume of our vital, irreplaceable life force, while remaining completely trapped in the exact same psychological groove of insufficiency, the constant calculation, the relentless scanning of organizational politics, the anxiety of lifestyle maintenance, and the weight of managing the impressions of our peers have created a slow, systemic burnout that no superficial weekend retreat or material luxury can ever repair. We cannot resolve a crowded, compromised consciousness by changing our external scenery, nor can we buy our way out of an internal prison using the very currency of accomplishment that built the walls in the first place. The entanglement is not located in our external financial success. It lives entirely in the mechanism through which we relate to our identity and our desires. We are caught in the golden filigree because we are the ones continuously tightening the wires, driven by a primal, unexamined fear that if we step off the corporate path, if we drop our hands from the machinery of performance even for a single breath, we will cease to exist. To understand how we became so profoundly entangled in this web of corporate prestige and financial entrapment, we must observe the living, breathing laboratory of our modern working lives. Consider a contemporary archetype that walks among us, an individual we might call the aesthetic prisoner of the ledger. This is a person who has achieved what society defines as an absolute apex of existence, possessing a razor-sharp intellect, a relentless capacity for high-yield strategy, and an enviable reputation across global professional networks. From the outside, their life appears as a sequence of bright, minimalist luxury spaces, uninterrupted professional milestones, and an impeccable, curated career trajectory. Internally, however, they are operating under a system of total somatic exhaustion. This individual has subconsciously adopted the core belief that their baseline human survival requires the permanent prediction and micromanagement of how much material and professional value they output to the market. They look at the tapestry of their daily existence, their private heartbreaks, their ordinary morning fatigue, and their fragile personal relationships, not as a living organic process to be experienced, but as a series of structural liabilities that must be constantly reinforced, optimized, and managed before any public exposure. Every ordinary interaction is cross-examined in the quiet theater of their mind long after it has concluded, weighed against the impossible heavy standards of their high-status corporate identity. They have turned their internal world into a permanent valuation room, operating under the structural assumption that if they stop maintaining their flawless, stylized armor for even a single hour, their true, messy reality will spontaneously shatter and expose them as inadequate to the tribe. If we look closely at this archetype, we begin to recognize that this pattern of relentless performance and identity curation is not just a passing mental habit. It writes its story directly into the physical tissue of our human anatomy. The body acts as a faithful, non-negotiable archive to our psychological neuroses, recording the exact shape of our anxieties in muscles, fascia, and neural pathways. When we spend our days locked in the frantic attempt to match a stylized, high-gurning reflection, our biological system believes we are facing an immediate material threat to our social belonging and safety. Notice the specific, predictable blueprint of this tension within our own frames as we sit here. The anterior neck muscles and the sternocleidomastoid, which run along the sides and front of the throat, become dense, shortened, and hard. Because we spend hours a day bending our gaze downward toward the spreadsheets and communication devices in our hands, these muscles are trapped in a state of chronic constriction. This forward head posture of evaluation pulls our skull out of its natural, graceful alignment with the spine. To compensate and keep our eyes level, the tiny suboccipital muscles at the very base of the skull must harden into rigid knots. This mechanical compression clamps down on the suboccipital nerves and restricts the natural fluid flow toward the brain, creating a dull, localized pressure that feels like an iron band tightened around the brow. It is the physical manifestation of trying to hold our head above an imagined flood of professional scrutiny and comparative judgment. This muscular tightening migrates downward, embedding itself along the ridge of the shoulders and deep into the respiratory center of our torso. The breath, which should ideally move like a slow, rhythmic tide, filling the lower basin of the abdomen, becomes structurally confined to the upper third of the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm hardens into a rigid shield, preventing the lungs from expanding downward, forcing the body to rely on the accessory respiratory muscles of the neck and upper chest to pull in shallow, rapid drafts of air. This upper chest breathing acts as a continuous internal distress signal, informing the survival centers of our brain that we are in a state of crisis, which in turn releases a steady drip of stress chemicals throughout our bloodstream. Furthermore, consider the subtle, unseen battle occurring within the oral cavity. The jaw is tightly compressed. The masseter and temporalis muscles locked in a vise-like grip that echoes the mind's refusal to surrender control or show vulnerability. The tongue, which should rest softly on the floor of the mouth like a sleeping animal, is pressed flat and hard against the hard palate, a somatic reflex of holding back unexpressed arguments, secret griefs, and unresolved choices. We are walking through our lives encapsulated in an armored shell of our own making, our bodies spent and depleted by the sheer physical effort of maintaining a defense against a baseline reality that we have deemed unacceptable. The great deception of this state of being is that the analytical mind completely mistakes this exhausting circular motion for genuine kinetic progress. When we are caught in a loop of identity curation and corporate comparison, our brain experiences a distorted sense of productivity. The intellect tells us that because we are feeling distressed, because we are burning cognitive energy, and because we are constantly scanning our environments for things to fix or document, we must be actively optimizing our lives. We tell ourselves that our intense self-critique is a form of high standards, that if we do not suffer over our ordinary human limitations, it means we lack the drive to improve. But if we analyze the psychology of this process objectively, we see that this constant comparative scrolling and self-editing is actually an elaborate, unconscious mechanism designed to avoid the raw discomfort of the present moment. True self-development is linear, constructive, and leads to an actionable sense of internal peace. Algorithmic rumination is cyclical, redundant, and serves only to magnify our sense of inner emptiness. It is the equivalent of a captain standing at the helm of a ship, gripped by a storm, violently spinning the steering wheel in continuous circles, while the vessel remains trapped in the exact same dangerous vortex. We are driving our biological vehicle, with the accelerator pressed flat to the floor, while the transmission is locked firmly in neutral, wondering why our engine is smoking and why we have not moved an inch closer to feeling genuinely loved and secure. This psychological loop creates a state of profound identity dysmorphia, a systemic draining of our finite cognitive and emotional resources. Every single day, the modern environment forces us to evaluate thousands of curated artifacts, comparing our behind-the-scenes reality with the highlight reels of the rest of the world. When the mind lacks an organic center of gravity, when it views every ordinary human flaw as a potential catastrophic mistake that must be edited out, the executive functioning of our consciousness begins to degrade. We find ourselves standing in the middle of our lives, surrounded by genuine, unmonetized blessings, yet completely paralyzed by a profound sense of overwhelm and insufficiency. The simple has become monumental, because our reservoir of psychological energy has been entirely leaked out through the thousands of small cracks of our continuous digital self-monitoring. We become trapped in an agonizing state of ambivalence, unable to rest in the skin we are currently in, terrified that our unpolished, unembellished self is fundamentally unappealing to the collective gaze. We forget that the choice to chase a ghost is a choice to remain suspended in a grey, sterile purgatory where no real, authentic human connection can occur, and where our vital life force is slowly, quietly bled dry by the friction of our own manufactured image. To understand the deepest root of this condition, we must look beyond our individual psychological quirks and examine the collective conditioning that shapes our minds. We have been raised in a hyper-transactional society that teaches us that our worth as human beings is entirely conditional upon our visibility, our efficiency, and our capacity to generate a predictable, highly marketable persona. We have internalized the narrative that a successful life is one that can be perfectly managed, documented, and displayed from the outside, treating our minds as the tireless director of a lifelong publicity campaign. This conditioning creates an underlying pervasive terror of our natural, non-linear human vulnerability. We view the wild, untamed, and unedited nature of our actual experiences not as a beautiful mystery to be danced with, but as an adversarial force that must be conquered through rigorous aesthetic and social engineering. This cultural sickness convinces us that to be ordinary, to be resting, or to allow our lives to unfold in their own unglamorous timing is a form of personal failure. We have traded the birthright of our natural presence for the cold, empty promise of digital validation. And in doing so, we have estranged ourselves from the deep, intuitive wisdom of our own bodies and the spontaneous, unfiltered baseline reality of life itself. This awareness of our physical and mental constriction forces us to confront a deeper truth about the nature of our distress. The exhaustion we carry is not a design flaw in our biology. It is the natural protest of a living vessel that has been forced to carry a weight it was never meant to bear. We cannot think our way out of a hall of mirrors, when the very tool we are using to seek freedom is the same hyper-analytical intellect that continuously polishes the glass. As we sit here together, feeling the persistent tightness in our shoulders, the restriction in our chests, and the restless, rapid movement of our thoughts, we are being invited to notice the cracks in the mirror. We are being called to witness the absolute futility of trying to construct an authentic life out of nothing but abstract images, comparisons, and curated projections. The momentum of our shared observation now demands that we look deeper beneath the physical surface of our tension, to dissect the exact psychological laws that govern this illusion, and to discover the precise, ancient wisdom that can shatter the glass of the mirror maze once and for all. We sit under the muted luxury of our climate-controlled surroundings, carrying the structural burden of this immense professional fatigue, yet a deeper, visceral shift begins to unfold within the silent theater of our shared consciousness. To completely unweave the gold filaments of our corporate entrapment and escape the prison of lifestyle inflation, we must hold our immediate experience entirely still under a sharp, uncompromising light of reality. We must look directly past our high-status titles, our elite credentials, and our luxury assets, and dissect the precise psychological mechanisms that cause us to actively participate in our own enslavement. When we trace the origins of our deep background anxiety, we discover that our suffering rarely stems from the objective demands of our careers, but from an invisible, lightning-fast loop of self-inflicted mental torture that operates beneath our conscious awareness. Thousands of years ago, a profound psychological insight was observed regarding the nature of human pain, teaching us that whenever an unexpected crisis, a professional setback, or an unglamorous event occurs in our lives, our biological frame is instantly struck by a specific sequence of dual experiences. The first experience is the raw, unedited event itself, an unexpected market shift, a difficult feedback session from an institutional board, or the simple reality of high monthly financial commitments. This initial touch contains no personal failure or inherent malice. It is simply the natural friction of a dynamic, unpredictable world, bringing a localized sting, a flash of genuine fatigue, or a moment of authentic confusion that passes through our experience like a sudden cloudburst across an open valley. Yet, almost instantaneously, before the echo of that first event has even faded from our nervous system. We pick up a heavy psychological weapon with our own hands and repeatedly drive it deep into our own consciousness. This secondary strike is our elaborate internal commentary, our obsessive overthinking, our toxic self-blame, and our frantic, terrified projection of future destitution. The first event causes a basic, manageable discomfort, but this second strike creates the vast, drowning ocean of our psychological suffering. When a transaction underperforms or an organizational role shifts, that is merely the first touch of reality. But when we spend the subsequent weeks lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, viciously telling ourselves that we are fraudulent, meticulously scripting 32 catastrophic scenarios of public ruin, and agonizingly punishing ourselves for being a real, limited human being instead of an omnipotent corporate machine, we are actively delivering the second strike to ourselves. We become both the torturer and the tortured, trapped in an exhausting loop of identity warfare. We fail to realize that our systemic burnout does not come from the genuine tasks of our professional landscape. It comes entirely from the immense volume of secondary editing, performance anxiety, and status maintenance we choose to inflict upon our minds. We are not suffocating because we are successful. We are suffocating because we are trying to build a concrete fortress around a moving current. If we trace the trajectory of this secondary psychological weapon to its ultimate point of origin, we inevitably discover that our entire modern cage of gold filigree is anchored to a single, foundational illusion: the myth of a permanent, isolated self that must be beautifully curated and defended at all costs. We operate under the unconscious, unquestioned assumption that there is a solid, unchanging entity called my career, my reputation, my net worth, or my elite identity sitting at the very center of our lives. We treat this fabricated professional persona like a fragile glass sculpture, believing that if we show an unedited flaw, experience a material downshift, or allow our performance velocity to drop, this sculpture will shatter into pieces, and we will cease to exist or matter to the collective tribe. This is why our modern decision fatigue feels so terrifyingly existential, and why choosing to slow down feels like a matter of absolute survival. We are not just navigating ordinary livelihood, we are carrying the immense, exhausting burden of believing that we must permanently manufacture and protect a static ego construct. We forget that this rigid, high-status identity we are destroying our physical biology to protect is not a permanent monument, it is a conceptual ghost, a fluid, ever-changing mosaic of temporary thoughts, organizational roles, social agreements, and passing mental states that has no fixed core. By treating this ghost as a permanent reality that must be constantly fortified through hypervigilance, we doom ourselves to a lifetime of defensive warfare against our own nature. To completely break the power of this illusion, we must open our eyes to the overarching, liberating truth of absolute impermanence, realizing that the very nature of reality is not a static ledger to be managed, but an unceasing fluid tapestry that weaves itself anew with every passing microsecond. Every atom in our physical vessel is in a state of continuous ecstatic exchange with the living world around us. The cells of our heart, our skin, and our lungs are constantly dying and being reborn, and the very breath we draw in right now was once the breath of ancient oceans and distant forests. Our professional titles, our financial assets, and our most intense anxieties are not solid boulders anchored in our consciousness. They are ephemeral currents of energy, rising from nothingness, dancing for a brief moment in our awareness, and dissolving back into the silence from which they came. When we understand this deeply, the frantic, white-knuckled need to control every thread of our financial future completely evaporates. We realize that a sudden professional pivot or a restructuring of our lifestyle is not a permanent stain on an unchanging identity, but simply a single temporary wave passing through a changing sea. There is no permanent corporate self to be ruined by an ordinary change, and there is no static future to be permanently secured by an endless accumulation of assets. The landscape of tomorrow is written entirely in water, and our attempts to carve our certainty into it, with the dull knife of overthinking, is a form of madness that only ensures our present misery. Let us look closely at the true nature of this mental grip we hold so tightly, for we often confuse our chronic performance anxiety with dedication, responsibility, or high standards. In the quiet corridors of our minds, we tell ourselves that our intense worry over status maintenance is a reflection of our commitment to our families, or that our frantic lifestyle inflation is a sign of our personal growth. But under the clinical, compassionate gaze of raw awareness, we see that this grip is not driven by love or responsibility. It is driven by a deep, terrifying undercurrent of resistance to the natural, changing flow of life. It is a tight, white-knuckled grasp on a highly specific, idealized projection of how our lives must look in order for us to feel allowed to rest. We are holding our breath, demanding that the natural atmosphere of reality stop moving so that we never have to face the vulnerability of being seen as simply human. This attachment to status is a form of spiritual stagnation, a rigid refusal to allow our lives to unfold in their own majestic, unpredictable, and often non-linear timing. When we demand that our careers and our bank accounts follow a perfectly linear, ascending script, we are suffocating the very life force out of our existence. We are trying to preserve a living bird by locking it inside an airtight vault of luxury. We may keep it safe from external predators, but we ensure that it dies of asphyxiation within our own hands. The moment we fully comprehend the absolute futility of this resistance, a profound structural shift begins to occur within the depths of our consciousness. We begin to see that our overthinking, comparing mind is like a small frantic creature barking at a passing thunderstorm, completely convinced that its noise is what keeps the sky from destroying the house. The storm of life moves according to vast, natural systemic movements that have absolutely nothing to do with our intellectual anxieties, our spreadsheets, or our curated filters. When we realize this, we can finally experience a deep, systemic drop in our internal electrical voltage. We can look at our unfinished career trajectories. We can look at our real human limitations, and we can look at the wild uncertainty of our modern society, and we can choose to lower our weapons. We can step out of the war room of our comparative intellect and stand nakedly in the open field of immediate, unadorned reality. We can feel the precise millisecond the mind tries to pick up that second weapon of self-judgment, and with a soft, spacious breath, we can simply choose to let it drop to the floor. We no longer need to look at our human lives as a commercial product to be optimized and marketed, but as an incredible, unfolding mystery to be lived, trusted, and experienced through the intelligence of an open, undefended heart. This drop in voltage allows us to notice the immediate space around us with an entirely fresh quality of perception, recognizing that the prison of the gold filigree only exists as long as we continue to tighten the wires. The moment we refuse to give our finite attention to the phantom metrics of accumulation, the golden handcuffs lose their locking power over our biological systems. We can feel our chest wall expanding with a new, raw permission to breathe, realizing that our value was never something that could be captured by an executive title, calculated by a financial ledger, or contained within a social class. Our true value is the very field of awareness in which these passing symbols occur, an unclassifiable, boundless depth that remains completely untouched by whether we are visible or invisible to the elite crowd. We are ready to move past the exhausting defense of an idealized corporate ghost, to leave the cold white light of our monitors behind, and to step directly into the practical architecture of our own somatic reclamation. discovering how to anchor our wild, wandering minds into the solid, unembellished sanctuary of the physical present. The realization that we have been the willing architects of our own golden confinement brings a sudden, heavy stillness into the room. A moment where the intricate armor of prestige we have spent decades engineering begins to feel entirely unnecessary. We see with absolute clarity now that the tangled, metallic mess on the loom of our minds cannot be cleared by pulling harder on the financial strings, nor can it be resolved by freezing in terror before the unfinished pattern of our professional lives. To transition from the high-stress defense room of the strategic intellect into the spacious, open landscape of true internal sovereignty, we must learn the delicate art of the open hand. We must discover how to master the unwoven gold filaments of our lifestyle inflation, developing a highly disciplined, somatic, and cognitive architecture that allows us to engage with our daily professional choices without losing our fundamental center of gravity. This is not a passive surrender to financial chaos, nor is it a careless abandonment of our societal responsibilities. It is the cultivation of a fierce, steady, and radiant internal clarity that knows how to act with absolute commercial precision while remaining completely unattached to the illusion of a static identity or a guaranteed lifestyle outcome. Our active transformation begins not in the abstract, theoretical realms of philosophy, but at the non-negotiable baseline of our biological existence, within the immediate physical sanctuary of the body. Whenever we feel the sudden, familiar surge of corporate decision fatigue, or when the analytical mind begins its supersonic spinning toward future financial catastrophes, we must execute a deliberate somatic interruption. Instead of allowing our focus to be sucked upward into the electrical storm of the cerebral cortex, we consciously drop our awareness deep into the structural foundation of our skeletal frame. We deliberately shift our center of gravity completely out of the hyperalert head and down into the weight of the pelvic bowl, feeling the solid, unyielding pressure of our thighs against the seat and the absolute stability of the soles of our feet resting flat against the earth. We take a slow, continuous breath, intentionally directing the air past the tight, frozen armor of the chest and deep into the soft, expanding basin of the lower abdomen. As the belly expands like a gentle wave, it mechanically stimulates the vagus nerve, sending an immediate, undeniable biological signal to the survival centers of our brain that the present moment is entirely secure. We feel the heavy weight of our shoulders dropping down toward the hips, the suboccipital muscles lengthening, and the micro-clenched jaw softening as the tongue is allowed to release its hard grip on the roof of the mouth and rest gently on the floor of the oral cavity. We are establishing an unshakable anchor in the storm, a physical shoreline from which we can observe the wild movement of our thoughts without being swept away by them. Once we have grounded our biological system in this heavy physical reality, we can turn our attention directly to the mental landscape and begin the transformative practice of objective mapping. When we are caught in a loop of status anxiety and lifestyle maintenance, we completely identify with our thoughts, believing that we are the anxious voice forecasting failure or the greedy voice demanding more accumulation. Through the discipline of bare awareness, we create a small, luminous wedge of distance between the observing consciousness and the observed phenomenon. As a professional thought rises from the dark waters of the mind, instead of riding it into a complex chain of secondary commentary, we simply observe its structural quality and stamp it with a quiet mental label. If the mind begins to construct a terrifying narrative about a potential career setback tomorrow, we do not engage with the details of the scenario. We simply whisper to ourselves, planning, or fearing. If the mind drifts back to an uncomfortable negotiation from last week, trying to recarve the past, we gently name it, remembering, or regretting. This simple act of precise labeling acts like a powerful solvent on an industrial adhesive. It strips the thought of its structural authority, transforming it from an absolute, terrifying reality into nothing more than a temporary, pixelated cloud passing through the vast sky of our awareness. We begin to see that a corporate thought has no native power to harm us or lock our golden handcuffs unless we willingly give it our breath, our belief, and our physical tension. As we master this capacity to observe our thoughts without becoming food for them, we are ready to cultivate a deeper, more profound quality of internal discipline, which is the capacity to sit comfortably with the incomplete picture. In our modern high-performing culture, we are plagued by an acute intolerance for ambiguity. We feel an urgent, frantic need to know how the corporate story ends, how our latest project will be received by the board, or where our net worth will stand 5 years from now. This intolerance forces us to make premature choices out of sheer anxiety, or to continuously tinker with life structures that are best left alone. We must counter this exhaustion by practicing a form of sacred non-striving, an internal posture where we allow the mental shuttle to rest entirely so that the loose threads of our lives can settle by their own weight. Think of a heavy glass jar of muddy water that has been violently shaken by a storm. If we try to clear the water by stirring it, or by forcing the mud to move, we only succeed in making it more turbulent and opaque. But if we simply place the jar on a shelf and leave it completely untouched, the heavy sediment naturally settles to the bottom through its own gravity, and the water becomes perfectly, beautifully transparent. Our minds operate under the exact same structural law. When we drop our hands from the golden loom, when we stop trying to force a financial answer or micromanage a professional outcome, the ambient confusion naturally clears, and the correct path reveals itself, not through frantic calculation, but through the spontaneous, quiet crystallization of native intelligence. This radical shift in our internal orientation requires us to fundamentally redefine our understanding of failure and success, transitioning from an outcome-oriented existence to an action-oriented existence. In the old paradigm of the overthinking, hig-earning mind, we judge the validity of our steps entirely by their final destination. If a commercial choice leads to a difficult financial result or a loss of prestige, we label it a catastrophic error and punish ourselves with the second arrow of self-blame. Through the lens of absolute presence, we realize that we can never truly control the fruit of our actions, because the moment an action leaves our hands, it enters a vast, infinite web of external market variables, economic shifts, and the unpredictable choices of millions of other beings. Therefore, true mastery lies not in securing a specific idealized lifestyle result, but in the absolute purity and integrity of the immediate step we are taking right now. If we step forward in our work with a heart that is clear, an intention that is clean, and a mind that is fully grounded in the immediate reality of the present, that step is already an absolute, unmitigated success, regardless of where the volatile current of life carries it. We free ourselves from the tyranny of the golden horizon, understanding that the quality of our entire life is determined entirely by the quality of the single step we are currently taking. We no longer treat the present moment as a disposable stepping stone to a distant, wealthier tomorrow. We treat the present step as the destination itself, fully saturated with our awareness, our care, and our creative devotion. To sustain this level of internal sovereignty amidst the constant torrent of modern corporate demands, we must establish a daily ritual of mental hygiene, a deliberate and uncompromising boundary around our finite attention. We must recognize that our awareness is the most precious, sacred commodity we possess, and that we have allowed it to be continuously hijacked, fragmented, and monetized by external architectures designed to keep us hypervigilant. We practice the discipline of intentional digital fasting, creating clean, unnegotiable spaces in our day where the mind is completely protected from the input of screens, performance metrics, and the endless comparison of luxury lifestyles. We learn to meet the simple, mundane tasks of our day: washing a dish, walking down a hallway, drinking a cup of tea, or listening to a colleague as interruptions to our productivity, but as profound opportunities to practice radical embodiment. When we drink a cup of tea, we are not thinking about the next presentation on our corporate agenda. We are fully present to the warmth of the ceramic against our skin, the rich aroma of the leaves, and the physical sensation of the liquid moving down our throat. We are retraining our nervous system to find joy, stability, and completion in the microlayers of immediate reality, breaking the systemic addiction to constant acceleration and mental anticipation. We are turning our ordinary, everyday existence into a continuous living meditation, building a reservoir of internal stillness that cannot be shaken by the shifting tides of financial markets or institutional expectations. Let us feel the immense, weightless freedom that comes from adopting this architecture of the open hand. We are no longer standing before the loom of our lives as terrified, frantic laborers, desperately trying to weave a gold shield against an unpredictable universe. We are standing as the open space through which the tapestry of life naturally unfolds, fully engaged, deeply responsible, yet completely untethered from the white-knuckled need for material certainty. We see that the threads of our lives do not need to be forced, knotted, or strangled into a specific high-status design. They are moving according to a grander, more fluid intelligence that we can learn to trust. We can breathe deeply, we can lower our shoulders into the earth, and we can allow our hands to open completely. We are ready to step out of the narrow, suffocating prison of our financial calculations and step directly into the vibrant, open field of our actual biological existence, discovering that the peace we have been searching for at the end of 1,000 future milestones has been waiting for us all along, right here, beneath the immediate, unadorned rhythm of our own breathing. The lingering warmth of that expanding breath stays with us, grounding our weight firmly into the floor beneath our feet, as the complex machinery of our chronic corporate identity curation finally grinds to a complete, liberating halt. We can feel a profound change occurring right here in the physical perimeter of our cells, a deep structural softening that signals the arrival of a completely new state of human consciousness. The invisible iron bands that have bound our anterior neck muscles and our suboccipital nerves for decades seem to melt away, allowing the skull to balance effortlessly atop the spine like a drop of morning dew resting on a lotus leaf. Our chest, once a tight, collapsed fortress of shallow breaths and protective shielding, opens up into a vast, windswept valley where the lungs can expand and contract with the ease of ocean tides. The tongue remains soft on the floor of the oral cavity, the jaw remains completely loose, and the skin across our forehead becomes as smooth as the surface of a wilderness lake on a windless night. We are no longer a frantic worker trapped inside a sweating, vibrating room of mirrors. We have stepped out of the exhibition entirely and are standing under the immense, unblemished dome of an open, natural sky. In this deep clarity, we realize that the mind is not a cluttered storage unit or a commercial gallery that needs to be constantly organized, curated, or defended against criticism, but rather a transparent mountain pool that reflects everything while remaining completely untouched by the images passing across its surface. We watch our remaining comparative thoughts arise, glide through our awareness, and dissolve back into nothingness, exactly like white clouds moving across an infinite blue firmament without leaving a single scar or scratch upon the sky. The frantic need to know what happens next, the agonizing pressure to force an immaculate aesthetic decision, and the exhausting compulsion to look for external validation are replaced by a monumental, unshakable self-sovereignty. We feel a profound inherent safety in the simple fact of our own existence, a realization that we do not need to purchase our belonging or our right to rest through perpetual self-monitoring or immaculate forecasting. The world before us loses its razor-sharp edges of threat and social demand, transforming instead into a beautiful, shifting landscape of pure potentiality, where every single choice is no longer an existential crisis, but a joyful, creative movement of our native, unfiltered intelligence. This is the great baseline of immanent groundedness, the unadvertised freedom that has always belonged to us, waiting patiently beneath the loud artificial architecture of our fires and our digital personas. We see now that the entire universe is an intertwined, living fabric that weaves itself in perfect harmony, and that we are an organic, inseparable strand within that magnificent design, requiring no editing to be worthy of our place. When we drop our hands from the mirrors, we are not abandoning our lives to chaos, we are trusting the deep, evolutionary current that has sustained us through every heartbeat, every breath, and every hidden transition of our lives. We understand that we possess an internal resilience that is fully capable of meeting whatever reality brings to our doorstep, meaning we no longer need to exhaust our precious life force by living through 1,000 hypothetical evaluations before they even arrive. We can walk through our modern, chaotic environments with a heart that is profoundly porous yet entirely unbreakable, responding to the challenges of our careers and relationships with absolute precision, unclouded by the heavy baggage of secondary self-judgment. As we prepare to transition from this quiet sanctuary of contemplation back into the active, moving theater of our daily modern lives, we carry this luminous stillness within our marrow like an invisible, unyielding compass. We remember the ancient, timeless encouragement left to us by the teacher of teachers, who urged us to be islands unto ourselves, to be our own light, and to look for refuge nowhere but within the immediate, raw reality of our own nature. We are reminded that the ultimate potential for liberation does not belong to a distant era or a special class of sages, but is a living, breathing reality encoded into the very mechanics of our present-day flesh and consciousness. The unedited events of our lives will continue to present themselves to us day after day, choice after choice, but we will never again mistake the movement of a phantom reflection for the value of our soul. We are the spaciousness in which the entire tapestry is happening, completely free, completely whole, and completely at peace in our own unembellished skin. So let us stand at this final threshold of our shared journey, letting the quietness settle into the deepest recesses of our being, and ask ourselves this one essential question to carry into the waking world. As we step back into the relentless rush of tomorrow, will we continue to struggle inside the mirror maze, or will we finally have the courage to break the glass and live in the raw honesty of our own unfiltered presence?